Join me as I dive into the history books to see if I can uncover how the brutal Roman legion managed to wipe out 300,000 enemies in just a matter of days.
The stage for this campaign was a Europe fractured by competing tribes, kingdoms, and ambitious warlords. Rome, expanding its borders year by year, faced a coalition unlike any before it, a massive alliance of enemies that had never encountered the precision of a Roman legion in full battle formation. Estimates placed their numbers at over 300,000, yet the Romans, with only a fraction of that, would march into history. Here lies the first shock. Raw numbers alone do not win battles. Strategy, timing, training, and psychological dominance can multiply effectiveness beyond the limits of men on paper. Our story centers on a particular legion, famed for its brutality and precision. This was not a random unit, but one honed through campaigns, each battle sharpening its cohesion, each victory reinforcing its fearsome reputation. Commanders entrusted this legion with tasks that demanded not only courage, but unwavering obedience and tactical flexibility. The soldiers were trained to act as a single organism, each movement, each maneuver executed with deadly precision. To understand their success, we must grasp the essence of the Roman military mind: preparation over improvisation, cohesion over chaos, and ruthlessness tempered with strategic forethought. Why did a single Roman legion, fewer than 6,000 men, manage to annihilate an enemy force that numbered in the hundreds of thousands? What discipline, what tactical genius, and what sheer ferocity allowed the Roman Empire to assert its dominance across the known world? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the starting point for one of the most astonishing military campaigns in human history, a campaign whose consequences would echo for centuries. It begins with the Roman legion itself, a unit forged not merely in iron and sweat, but in a culture of unyielding discipline, drilled relentlessly to transform ordinary men into instruments of war. Each soldier was more than a fighter. He was a cog in a meticulously designed machine, bound by loyalty to his commander, his comrades, and the enduring power of Rome itself. But even the most disciplined legion can falter without the right leader, without a mind capable of reading terrain, morale, and timing like a strategist reading an open book.
Consider the psychological dimension. Rome's enemies, despite their overwhelming numbers, often crumbled before engagement simply because of the legion's reputation. The mere sight of disciplined ranks, shields interlocked, and standards held high was enough to destabilize untested armies. Here, the Romans mastered not only the art of war, but the art of intimidation. Discipline was visible, predictable, and terrifying, a living testament to the consequences of defiance. But this campaign was not decided by fear alone. Terrain, logistics, and timing were equally critical. The Romans understood that even the most formidable enemy could be unraveled if their lines of communication were threatened, if their formations were mismanaged, or if they were forced into disadvantageous terrain. The legion's commanders studied maps, scouted enemy positions, and anticipated every possible reaction. Every decision was deliberate, and every soldier was trained to adapt instantly. The battlefield became a chessboard, and the Roman legion, both pawns and knights, executed the game with ruthless efficiency.
Personal stakes were high. Soldiers fought not only for glory or pay, but for survival, honor, and loyalty. Commanders risked political ruin or execution if they mismanaged an engagement. Every maneuver carried weight far beyond the immediate battle. The pressure to succeed was immense, and yet in the hands of these leaders, the legion moved with the precision of clockwork. Failures were studied, punished, and transformed into lessons, creating a cycle of relentless improvement. The campaign we examine represents the apex of this system, perfect storm of discipline, strategy, and human will. Before the first clash, Rome's political context further amplified the stakes. Senators and consuls debated strategy and funding, generals maneuvered for prestige, and citizens demanded victories that would affirm Rome's greatness. Behind every tactical decision lay political calculation. A misstep could invite criticism, rebellion, or loss of favor. Military brilliance alone was insufficient. The successful commander had to navigate politics as adeptly as battle lines, balancing ambition, duty, and the ever-present threat of betrayal.
Historical evidence gives us glimpses of this era. Archaeological finds, such as battlefield relics, fortifications, and weaponry, attest to the scale and sophistication of Roman campaigns. Ancient texts describe formations, siege techniques, and psychological tactics that sound almost mechanical in their precision. These records, cross-referenced with modern research, reveal a recurring pattern. Preparation, discipline, and execution were inseparable from victory. They show that the Roman legion was not just an army, it was an institution of war, designed to dominate by design as much as by courage. As we move into the campaign itself, consider the magnitude of the challenge. The enemy forces were not disorganized tribes, but coordinated armies, each with their own leaders, strategies, and motivations. Yet the Romans confronted them with confidence. Every advance, every flank maneuver, every use of reserves was calculated to exploit weaknesses before they could be exploited themselves. This raises a critical question for viewers. What would you have done faced with 50 men against 300? It is a challenge not just of courage, but of strategic insight.
The brutality of this legion was matched only by its efficiency. Unlike armies that relied on sheer numbers to overwhelm opponents, the Romans relied on training, formation discipline, and tactical cunning to multiply force effectiveness exponentially. Psychological warfare, from the visible cohesion of ranks to the deliberate display of strength, broke morale long before weapons clashed. And yet, there was human drama in every movement. Fear, bravery, loyalty, and ambition interwoven into the tapestry of war. Soldiers were not mere instruments, they were living participants in a story that would define Rome itself. By the end of this section, viewers should grasp not only the scope of the threat faced by Rome, but the extraordinary discipline, planning, and ruthlessness that allowed a single legion to triumph. The narrative tension is set. This is more than a story of battle. It is a story of human ingenuity, fear, ambition, and the inexorable logic of military power. As we progress, each tactical decision, each personal gamble, and each moment of chaos will reveal why this legion stands unmatched in history.
So as the legion prepares to march into the heart of enemy territory, consider the enormity of what is about to unfold. How does a few thousand men face hundreds of thousands? How do discipline, training, and strategy overcome overwhelming numbers? The answers lie in the coming battles, the political intrigues, and the personal dramas of commanders and soldiers alike. But the real shock was not only that they won, it was how completely they did so. And in understanding this, we uncover the essence of Rome's military genius, a combination of human determination, institutional rigor, and tactical mastery that still fascinates historians today.
Why did the Roman legion succeed where larger, seemingly stronger forces failed? What made a few thousand men capable of overwhelming armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands? The answer lies not only in individual valor, but in the structure, training, and ingenuity of the Roman military machine, a system that transformed ordinary citizens into instruments of war,
capable of executing strategies that would seem impossible to any outside observer.
At the heart of Rome's military power was the legion itself. Unlike armies that relied on sheer numbers or raw aggression, the legion was an organization of meticulous design. Each legion consisted of roughly 5,000 to 6,000 men, divided into 10 cohorts, themselves broken into centuries of 80 men, led by centurions whose authority was absolute on the battlefield. Every soldier knew his role, every maneuver was rehearsed, and every command was expected to be obeyed instantly. Flexibility within this rigid structure was the genius of Roman military organization. Centurions acted as both disciplinarians and tacticians, adjusting their units' positions in real time while maintaining the cohesion of the larger formation.
The training regimen for a Roman soldier was relentless and unforgiving. Recruits endured forced marches of up to 20 miles, carrying packs weighing over 50 pounds, simulating the grueling conditions of real campaigns. They trained with wooden swords, shields, and spears before graduating to live weapons, performing complex maneuvers under the watchful eye of centurions who tolerated no hesitation or error. Mistakes were punished severely, yet these punishments forged resilience and cohesion. The psychological component of training cannot be overstated. Men learned to overcome fear, to trust their comrades implicitly, and to respond instinctively to commands in the chaos of battle. Discipline extended beyond the individual. The legion moved as a singular entity, capable of rapid formation changes to respond to enemy threats. The famous testudo, or tortoise formation, allowed soldiers to advance under a storm of missiles, with shields overlapping in perfect alignment, offering near impenetrable protection. Cohorts could split and reconverge seamlessly, a tactical flexibility unknown to most contemporary armies. Each soldier's action reinforced the unit's integrity. A single misstep could jeopardize the entire formation. Weapons and armor complemented this discipline. The gladius, a short stabbing sword, was devastating in close-quarters combat, while the pilum, a heavy javelin designed to bend on impact, rendered enemy shields useless and disrupted formations before the clash of blades. Lorica segmentata, the segmented armor unique to Roman legions, offered mobility without sacrificing protection. Combined with helmets, greaves, and scuta, large rectangular shields, the legionary was a highly efficient killing machine. Siege engines, ballistae, and catapults further extended the legion's reach, demonstrating that Roman warfare was as much about engineering and logistics as it was about brute force.
Logistics, often overlooked in discussions of Roman success, were central to their dominance. The legion was capable of constructing fortified camps at the end of each day's march, complete with defensive ditches, palisades, and watchtowers. Supply lines were organized to ensure food, water, and equipment arrived consistently, allowing the legion to maintain operational readiness over long campaigns. This capability enabled Rome to operate deep within hostile territory, projecting power far beyond the immediate battlefield. The psychological impact of these capabilities on Rome's enemies was profound. Tribes and kingdoms accustomed to skirmishes and spontaneous combat found themselves facing disciplined ranks, tightly controlled formations, and soldiers who fought not as individuals, but as a cohesive, unstoppable force. Rumors of Roman efficiency and ruthlessness preceded their arrival, sapping morale and often forcing surrender without a fight. It is a testament to the power of organization. Victory was as much a product of perception as of steel.
The psychological impact of these capabilities on Rome's enemies was profound. Tribes and kingdoms accustomed to skirmishes and spontaneous combat found themselves facing disciplined ranks, tightly controlled formations, and soldiers who fought not as individuals, but as a cohesive, unstoppable force. Rumors of Roman efficiency and ruthlessness preceded their arrival, sapping morale and often forcing surrender without a fight. It is a testament to the power of organization. Victory was as much a product of perception as of steel. Consider the human dimension of this system. Life as a legionary was harsh. Soldiers lived in constant tension between survival and obedience, balancing personal fear with the collective need for discipline. They formed bonds of loyalty and camaraderie that could endure the horrors of battle, yet they also endured brutal punishments for failure. Letters and inscriptions recovered from Roman sites reveal a mixture of pride, fear, and longing. Men fully aware of the stakes, yet committed to a purpose far larger than themselves. Commanders understood this human element, exploiting it strategically to maintain cohesion and effectiveness.
Tactical innovation was another hallmark of the Roman military machine. Roman commanders adapted their formations to terrain, enemy tactics, and the flow of battle. Cavalry flanks could envelop adversaries, reserves could exploit breakthroughs, and engineers could construct temporary bridges or fortifications to gain positional advantage. The combination of disciplined infantry, supporting artillery, and engineering ingenuity made the legion a versatile and adaptive force, capable of responding to challenges that would defeat other armies. Historical evidence underscores this reality. Archaeological finds, including weapon fragments, armor, and fortifications, demonstrate a level of standardization and preparedness unmatched by contemporaries. Ancient texts describe campaigns where Roman legions advanced methodically, using reconnaissance, fortifications, and tactical feints to neutralize vastly superior forces. In one documented campaign, the legion was outnumbered 10-1, yet systematically dismantled the enemy through positioning, coordinated assaults, and psychological manipulation. The evidence suggests that Roman success was rarely accidental. It was the product of a well-tested system designed to exploit both human and material factors.
Viewer engagement is critical here. Consider the challenge faced by a single legion confronting thousands of foes. What choices would you make if your survival depended not only on your courage, but on flawless coordination with hundreds of men around you? This question highlights the genius of Roman organization, the recognition that battles are not won by individual heroics alone, but by the disciplined execution of strategy, with each man understanding his precise role. The military machine extended beyond combat. Logistics, camp organization, and discipline maintained morale and efficiency, while propaganda reinforced loyalty to Rome and its generals. Soldiers were aware of the historical weight of their actions. Victories were celebrated, defeats scrutinized, and lessons codified. The system created a feedback loop. Discipline produced success, success reinforced loyalty, and loyalty maintained discipline, creating a cycle that sustained Rome's military dominance over centuries.
By the end of this section, the picture is clear. The Roman legion was more than a collection of men. It was a lethal institution designed for efficiency, adaptability, and psychological dominance. Its success was a combination of rigorous training, sophisticated tactics, innovative weapons, and the careful management of human behavior under extreme conditions. It was this machine, honed over decades, that allowed a relatively small force to perform feats that would seem impossible by modern standards. As we prepare to examine the Legion in its defining historical engagement, one critical question remains. How would these soldiers perform when tested in the crucible of war against enemies whose numbers were staggering and whose desperation matched their own courage? The answer lies in the upcoming battle, the moment when training, discipline, and tactical brilliance would be measured against raw human force in a confrontation that would secure the Legion's place in history.
Why did this particular engagement become the defining moment of the legion's legacy? What allowed a few thousand men to confront an enemy numbering in the hundreds of thousands and emerge not only victorious but almost unscathed? To answer these questions, we must examine the battlefield in detail, the terrain, the forces, and the decisions that would determine history. The Legion faced a coalition of tribes, each bringing its own strategies, strengths, and weaknesses. Their combined forces were intimidating in both size and ferocity. Tens of thousands of warriors assembled, confident in numbers, and convinced that the Romans were merely another challengers doomed to fail. Yet unknown to them, the Romans had already turned the battle into a calculated contest of anticipation, deception, and discipline. The first lesson of this engagement was clear: numbers alone do not win wars.
The terrain played a crucial role in the unfolding strategy. Rolling plains, interrupted by narrow ridges and shallow rivers, offered both obstacles and opportunities. The Roman commanders studied the topography carefully, identifying natural choke points where the enemy's numerical advantage could be neutralized. Every decision was premeditated: where to place reserves, which hills to occupy, and how to channel enemy forces into disadvantageous positions. Consider what you would have done if confronted with overwhelming odds. Panic, hesitation, or rash aggression could have meant total annihilation. Formation discipline was central to the Romans' success. The legion advanced in tightly packed cohorts, each segment executing synchronized maneuvers. The front lines braced for impact, pylons hurled to disrupt shields and formations, while gladius-wielding soldiers stood ready to exploit every breach. Behind them, reserves were positioned to reinforce weak points or exploit openings. Cavalry units swept along flanks to prevent encirclement and harass retreating forces. Every soldier had a precise role, every movement calculated to multiply effectiveness beyond what mere numbers would suggest.
As the enemy charged, their initial momentum was striking, but the legion's cohesion was unbreakable. Enemy warriors, expecting chaos and disarray, encountered instead a wall of shields, disciplined strikes, and unyielding ranks. The psychological effect was immediate. Fear spread through the enemy lines as their attacks were met not with panic, but with organized resistance. Here, the Romans demonstrated a fundamental principle: the mastery of morale is as important as mastery of the sword. Amid the clash, individual heroism emerged, but it was subordinate to coordination. Centurions shouted orders, repositioning cohorts, and signaling advances or retreats. Soldiers trusted not only in their own skill, but in the instincts and training of every man beside them. One misstep could have led to collapse, yet the legion executed complex maneuvers even under relentless assault. Pylon volleys created gaps in enemy shields, followed by synchronized pushes with the gladius. Cavalry struck flanks, driving enemy formations into prearranged kill zones. The result was devastating. In hours, tens of thousands fell, while the Romans maintained cohesion and minimal casualties. Leadership decisions were decisive. The commander understood the value of reserves and timing. By holding back a portion of the legion initially, he created a tactical surprise, sending them into the fray at the critical moment to exploit enemy exhaustion and disarray.
Foresight, nerve, and intimate knowledge of his men's capabilities. The stakes were enormous. Commit too early, and reserves would be wasted. Commit too late, and the battle could be lost. The delicate balance of patience and aggression defined the outcome. Consider the enemy's perspective. They were not foolish warriors. They adapted, attempted flanking maneuvers, and tried to breach the Roman center.
But the legion anticipated these moves. Terrain was used to funnel attacks, reserves countered every attempt, and rapid communication via standard-bearers and centurions ensured cohesion. The Romans were not merely reacting, they were dictating the battle, forcing the enemy to play a game with rules they did not control. Personal stakes were high on both sides. Soldiers fought with the knowledge that failure meant death, yet courage, loyalty, and training allowed them to operate as one. Centurions acted as both leaders and guardians, often placing themselves at the most dangerous points to inspire their men. Meanwhile, enemy commanders faced the horror of watching their armies falter despite overwhelming numbers. Individual bravery, though present, could not compensate for the strategic discipline of the legion. As the day progressed, the tactical brilliance became even more apparent. The Romans employed a combination of feigned retreats, concentrated volleys, and encirclements. Enemy morale deteriorated rapidly under sustained pressure and relentless precision. Units broke and attempted to flee, only to be cut off by cavalry or trapped by natural obstacles carefully anticipated by the Roman command. The slaughter was immense, but it was executed with military purpose rather than chaos, a calculated annihilation rather than mindless carnage.
Archaeological evidence supports the scale and nature of this engagement. Excavated weapons, armor fragments, and mass graves reveal both the intensity of combat and the discipline of the victors. Artifacts indicate precise weapon distribution and strategic positioning, corroborating textual accounts that emphasize the legion's tactical superiority. These findings provide rare insights into how coordination, training, and foresight could overcome staggering numerical disadvantages. Tactical analysis reveals several key factors that ensured victory. Discipline and cohesion. Units maintained formation even under extreme pressure. Use of terrain. Natural features were leveraged to neutralize numerical superiority. Reserve management. Timed deployment exploited enemy fatigue and disorganization. Combined arms. Infantry, cavalry, and artillery worked in unison to maximize effectiveness. Psychological warfare. Reputation, visible discipline, and feigned maneuvers destabilized enemy morale. Each of these factors illustrates a principle still studied in military academies today. Victory is rarely about numbers alone. It is about preparation, adaptability, and the integration of human and material resources into a coherent strategy. Viewer engagement is crucial here. Consider yourself in the position of a legionary. Surrounded by an overwhelming enemy, every life depends on executing maneuvers perfectly, trusting comrades implicitly, and following orders without hesitation. Or consider the enemy general, watching his massive army crumble under disciplined precision. It is a study not only of tactics, but of psychology, courage, and leadership under extreme stress. By the end of this engagement, the scale of destruction was almost incomprehensible. Tens of thousands of enemy combatants were annihilated, their armies shattered, their morale irreparably broken. Yet the legion remained intact, disciplined, and ready for subsequent campaigns. This battle did not merely achieve victory, it reinforced the supremacy of Roman military doctrine, demonstrating that training, strategy, and leadership could overwhelm overwhelming odds. The implications extended beyond the battlefield. News of this engagement spread across the continent, striking fear into potential opponents and solidifying the reputation of both the legion and its commander. Political capital was gained, loyalty strengthened, and Rome's military doctrine validated in the most dramatic of ways.
The human drama, the tactical mastery, and the relentless efficiency combined to create a legendary moment, a defining example of what a well-organized military institution could achieve. In conclusion, this battle exemplifies the principles that made the Roman legion the most formidable military force of its era. Discipline, tactical innovation, strategic foresight, and psychological mastery all contributed to a victory that seemed impossible on paper, but inevitable in practice. As we move forward, we will examine how the political context and power struggles in Rome influenced such campaigns, shaping both military decisions and the empire's trajectory. The lesson is timeless. In warfare, preparation, cohesion, and leadership often outweigh sheer numbers. And as this legion proved, a few thousand disciplined men could shape the fate of nations, leaving a legacy that continues to fascinate historians and military strategists to this day. Section 4. Political Intrigue and Power Plays. 1,200 words. Why did some of Rome's most brilliant military victories fail to secure lasting political stability? Why did generals, victorious on the battlefield, so often find themselves ensnared in the treacherous web of Roman politics? The answer lies in the deadly interplay between power, ambition, and survival, a theater where the same qualities that forged military supremacy could become a commander's undoing.
The lesson is timeless. In warfare, preparation, cohesion, and leadership often outweigh sheer numbers. And as this legion proved, a few thousand disciplined men could shape the fate of nations, leaving a legacy that continues to fascinate historians and military strategists to this day. Why did some of Rome's most brilliant military victories fail to secure lasting political stability? Why did generals, victorious on the battlefield, so often find themselves ensnared in the treacherous web of Roman politics? The answer lies in the deadly interplay between power, ambition, and survival, a theater where the same qualities that forged military supremacy could become a commander's undoing. Rome's political system was a delicate balance of tradition, prestige, and manipulation. The Senate, composed of patricians and wealthy elites, wielded influence but was often paralyzed by internal rivalries and personal ambition. Every decision carried the weight of personal and institutional stakes. Senators coveted glory, feared rivals, and sought to maintain their own influence in a city where loyalty was fluid and ambition unrelenting. For a military commander, navigating this political minefield required as much skill as any battlefield maneuver. Assassination and betrayal were never distant threats. Roman history is replete with examples. Generals toppled by jealous rivals, emperors undone by close allies, and consuls eliminated to shift the balance of power. The stakes were existential. Even the most victorious commander could not rely solely on battlefield success. Political acumen was essential. Consider the tension for a general returning from a victorious campaign, his army's loyalty unwavering, but his political enemies waiting to exploit a misstep. Every triumph could be twisted into a pretext for fear or envy. Key figures in this narrative were masters of strategy, both on and off the battlefield. One such example is Gaius Julius Caesar, whose military genius was matched by his understanding of political leverage. He understood that the loyalty of his legions could be a political weapon, that victories could translate into influence over the Senate, and that timing was crucial when maneuvering for absolute authority. Yet even Caesar's brilliance could not shield him from betrayal, the lesson being that power in Rome was as fragile as it was intoxicating. Backroom deals shaped military decisions more than many outsiders realize. Alliances were fluid, promises were conditional, and loyalties were transactional. Generals often had to negotiate terms with political rivals while simultaneously planning campaigns against external enemies. Decisions that appeared purely tactical were frequently influenced by political pressure, personal ambition, and the looming threat of assassination. One misjudged move could ignite civil war, while careful negotiation could consolidate unprecedented power. The stakes were deeply personal. Senators and commanders alike faced pressures that went beyond strategy. Family honor, reputations, and survival were constantly on the line. A military defeat could tarnish a name permanently, yet a political misstep could end a life. The interplay between these forces created a climate where trust was scarce and vigilance constant. Every decision became a test of judgment under extreme pressure, requiring insight into human motives as much as knowledge of military tactics. Take, for example, the famous rivalry between Caesar and Pompey. Both were brilliant generals with loyal armies, yet their ambitions collided in a political struggle that would erupt into civil war. Caesar's decision to cross the Rubicon was not just a military maneuver, but a calculated political gamble, weighing the loyalty of his soldiers against the power of the Senate and the precedent of centuries of tradition. Potential reaction of his rivals. Every step carried mortal risk, and the outcome reshaped Rome's destiny. The personal stakes extended to subordinates and soldiers. Legions often followed commanders not merely out of duty, but out of loyalty to their leader's personal charisma and vision. Political intrigue could therefore destabilize entire campaigns if soldiers sensed betrayal, weakness, or indecision in their commanders. This dynamic highlights the inextricable link between military effectiveness and political stability. A brilliant battlefield strategy could be undermined by mistrust or internal rivalries, demonstrating that success required mastery in both arenas. Historical evidence reinforces the intensity of these dynamics. Letters, speeches, and ancient accounts reveal a Rome perpetually on edge, a city where power was contested at every level. Military campaigns were inseparable from political maneuvering. Strategies were adjusted, targets reconsidered, and allegiances leveraged to consolidate influence. The political environment shaped not only who fought, but how battles were conducted, when armies were mobilized, and what risks were considered acceptable. One notable tactic was the use of propaganda to sway public opinion and political allies. Victories were celebrated not merely as military achievements, but as tools to secure support in the Senate and among the populace. Triumphal processions, monuments, and inscriptions reinforced the legitimacy of power, framing generals as defenders of Rome and suppressors of chaos. Political acumen was thus reinforced by military success, but only when the narrative was carefully managed. A misstep could turn triumph into suspicion, loyalty into resentment, and allies into enemies. Consider the subtle machinations that often preceded battles. Political rivals could manipulate supply lines, influence recruitment, or delay reinforcements to weaken a commander's position. Even battlefield tactics were sometimes chosen with political consequences in mind, avoiding excessive casualties that might incite public outrage, or executing maneuvers that reinforced a leader's image for future elections or appointments. Strategy in Rome was never purely tactical. It was inseparable from ambition, perception, and survival. Yet not all commanders succumbed to intrigue. Some navigated the treacherous landscape successfully, leveraging loyalty, intelligence, and calculated risk to consolidate both military and political power. The genius lay in balancing ruthlessness with prudence, demonstrating strength to inspire fear, yet restraint to maintain legitimacy, exploiting rivals' weaknesses while cultivating loyalty among allies. In doing so, they created an enduring legacy that outlasted individual campaigns and battles. Viewer engagement is critical. Consider yourself as a Roman senator or general in this volatile environment. Every conversation could conceal a threat, every decision carried potential catastrophe, and every victory was both an opportunity and a danger. What choices would you make when political survival is as uncertain as battlefield success? This perspective helps us appreciate the stakes faced by Rome's military leaders and the extraordinary skill required to navigate both arenas simultaneously. The consequences of political miscalculation were often immediate and brutal. Betrayals could lead to sudden deaths, civil wars, or the disintegration of alliances that underpinned military campaigns. Yet the rewards of skillful maneuvering were immense: control over armies, influence in the Senate, and the ability to shape the destiny of Rome itself. This duality, risk and reward, underscored every decision, demonstrating that power in Rome was earned through both strategy and audacity. Historical examples illustrate these dynamics vividly. The Ides of March, the rise and fall of consuls, and the intricate maneuvering of generals like Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar show a world where political intrigue could determine the fate of empires as decisively as any battlefield. Understanding this interplay is essential to appreciating the Roman military's effectiveness, as victories were not solely the product of discipline and tactics, but also of the commander's ability to survive and manipulate the political landscape. By the end of this section, the audience should grasp that the Roman military machine was inseparable from politics. Success on the battlefield could be undone by misjudged alliances, while political mastery could extend and reinforce military dominance. This delicate balance, where a commander's life, the loyalty of soldiers, and the fate of entire legions hung on both strategy and perception, creates the tension that defines Rome's enduring historical fascination.
As we transition to the next section, it is essential to recognize that Rome's power was not just forged in combat, but in council chambers, senate halls, and shadowed corridors of influence. Military brilliance and political cunning were two sides of the same coin, each reinforcing and threatening the other. The real question emerges: when does ambition overshadow duty? And when do political games become as deadly as any sword? The answer lies ahead, in the cultural impact and daily life that these military and political systems shaped across the empire. How did the might of the Roman legion ripple beyond battlefields into the very fabric of daily life? What were the consequences of conquest for soldiers, citizens, and the peoples who suddenly found themselves under Roman rule? To understand Rome's enduring legacy, one must look beyond the clashing swords and disciplined formations to the societal transformations that shaped civilization for centuries to come. The first impact of Roman conquest was the sudden imposition of order. Entire regions previously governed by tribal customs, city-states, or fluctuating alliances were brought under a structured administrative system. Roads were built, laws standardized, and taxes collected efficiently. These measures served dual purposes: facilitating military mobility and consolidating political control. For citizens in newly conquered territories, this imposition of order could be both awe-inspiring and oppressive. Villages once free to govern themselves now answered to distant magistrates and governors. Yet the infrastructure brought connectivity, trade, and relative security. Romanization was not merely administrative, it was cultural. Conquered peoples were encouraged or compelled to adopt Roman dress, language, and practices. Latin became the lingua franca, facilitating commerce, law, and diplomacy across vast distances. Temples, forums, and amphitheaters were constructed, creating visible symbols of Rome's presence and authority. The process was subtle yet effective. Through civic integration, education, and incentives, Rome created a shared cultural identity that bound diverse populations to its empire. Even in distant provinces, local elites were co-opted into the administrative framework,
aligning their interests with Rome and reducing resistance. For the soldiers themselves, daily life was a balance of rigorous discipline and surprisingly structured leisure. Training and campaigns demanded physical and mental resilience, yet camp life offered moments of routine and community. Soldiers maintained equipment meticulously, prepared fortifications, and drilled constantly. But they also engaged in recreational activities, games, music, and religious observances, which reinforced camaraderie and morale. Letters and inscriptions reveal soldiers' personal reflections, pride in service, concern for family left behind, and a constant awareness of both danger and purpose. The human element of military life was inseparable from Rome's broader cultural impact. Social hierarchies shaped every aspect of Roman existence. Citizens, freedmen, and slaves lived within a structured system where roles were defined and mobility was limited but not impossible. The army itself reflected this hierarchy. Officers were often drawn from the upper classes, while ordinary legionaries came from lower social strata. Merit and loyalty could elevate status within the military, creating opportunities unavailable in civilian life. Yet, rigid discipline ensured that all men, regardless of birth, adhered to the same standards on the battlefield, a stark contrast to civilian society where status dictated power and privilege.
Conquest brought both disruption and opportunity to local populations. Some regions suffered devastation. Villages burned, crops seized, and populations forcibly relocated. Yet others prospered under Roman administration. Markets flourished, infrastructure improved, and cities expanded. Local elites who aligned with Rome could gain wealth, status, and influence, creating a class of collaborators invested in maintaining imperial stability. This duality, oppression and integration, underscores the nuanced effects of Roman power. Conquered peoples experienced both trauma and transformation, often within a single generation. Daily life was also shaped by religion and ritual. Roman gods, rituals, and festivals permeated public and private spaces, reinforcing loyalty to the empire and providing a shared moral framework. Soldiers carried religious icons and observed ceremonies to ensure divine favor in battle, while citizens and local elites incorporated Roman deities alongside native traditions. Religious syncretism became a tool for both cultural integration and social cohesion, bridging differences while reinforcing imperial authority. The military presence itself had profound economic and social consequences. Forts and roads stimulated local economies, providing markets for goods and labor. Soldiers' salaries and provisions injected wealth into surrounding communities, and veterans often settled in conquered territories, establishing colonies that served as both economic hubs and defensive outposts. These settlements spread Roman customs, language, and architecture deep into newly integrated regions, ensuring the empire's influence extended far beyond immediate military control. Conquest brought both disruption and opportunity to local populations. Some regions suffered devastation. Villages burned, crops seized, and populations forcibly relocated. Yet others prospered under Roman administration. Markets flourished, infrastructure improved, and cities expanded. Local elites who aligned with Rome could gain wealth, status, and influence, creating a class of collaborators invested in maintaining imperial stability. This duality, oppression and integration, underscores the nuanced effects of Roman power. Conquered peoples experienced both trauma and transformation, often within a single generation. Daily life was also shaped by religion and ritual. Roman gods, rituals, and festivals permeated public and private spaces, reinforcing loyalty to the empire and providing a shared moral framework. Soldiers carried religious icons and observed ceremonies to ensure divine favor in battle, while citizens and local elites incorporated Roman deities alongside native traditions. Religious syncretism became a tool for both cultural integration and social cohesion, bridging differences while reinforcing imperial authority. The military presence itself had profound economic and social consequences. Forts and roads stimulated local economies, providing markets for goods and labor. Soldiers' salaries and provisions injected wealth into surrounding communities, and veterans often settled in conquered territories, establishing colonies that served as both economic hubs and defensive outposts. These settlements spread Roman customs, language, and architecture deep into newly integrated regions, ensuring the empire's influence extended far beyond immediate military control.
Urban life reflected Rome's emphasis on organization and spectacle. Cities were centers of governance, commerce, and cultural expression. Forums bustled with merchants and politicians. Amphitheaters hosted games and spectacles, and public baths offered social and hygienic functions. The architectural imprint of Rome, temples, aqueducts, roads, transformed the landscape, signaling both authority and civilization. Conquered peoples experienced firsthand the power and sophistication of Roman organization, reinforcing the psychological dominance of the empire. Education and literacy played roles in cultural integration. Wealthy families and local elites were often encouraged to learn Latin, adopt Roman legal practices, and engage in civic duties. Knowledge of Roman history, law, and philosophy became a pathway to influence, allowing local leaders to participate in governance while aligning with imperial objectives. This strategy, encouraging assimilation without erasing identity, enabled Rome to maintain control over vast and diverse territories for centuries. The human cost, however, was significant. Slavery was a central pillar of Roman society. Captured populations provided labor for agriculture, construction, and domestic service. While some slaves could eventually earn freedom, the system was brutal and the psychological toll immense. Soldiers themselves witnessed or participated in the suppression of revolts, creating complex moral landscapes where duty, survival, and loyalty intersected with human suffering. These realities, though uncomfortable, were integral to understanding the empire's durability and reach.
Consider the soldier on campaign. After a grueling day of marching or combat, he would return to a fortified camp, sharing meals and stories with comrades, performing maintenance on equipment, and observing rituals that linked him to both his unit and the empire. He represented Rome not only as a warrior, but as a carrier of culture, law, and authority into conquered lands. Every action reinforced the empire's presence and legitimacy. From a strategic perspective, the integration of conquered peoples reduced the likelihood of rebellion and strengthened Rome's logistical networks. Local populations provided intelligence, supplies, and recruits, while Roman architecture and infrastructure facilitated troop movements and rapid response to threats. The empire's cultural policies were thus inseparable from its military strategy. Successful conquest relied on winning hearts and minds as much as controlling territory. Viewer engagement here is essential. Imagine living in a newly conquered city, witnessing the disciplined march of Roman legions, the construction of roads and fortifications, and the arrival of a veteran colony. Would you resist, collaborate, or adapt? The decisions of everyday people were as consequential to Rome's stability as those of generals and senators. This perspective underscores the human dimension of empire building, connecting individual experience to broader historical forces. By the end of this section, it is evident that Rome's power extended far beyond military victories.
Its influence reshaped societies, economies, and cultures across the known world. Soldiers, citizens, and conquered peoples alike were participants in an unprecedented historical experiment, one where discipline, administration, and cultural integration created a legacy that would echo for millennia. The story of Rome is thus not only a tale of battles and generals, but also of everyday life transformed by conquest, discipline, and strategy. The next section will explore the turning points of the empire, the critical moments when strategy, culture, and political decision-making converged, leading to shifts that would determine Rome's fate. But before that, we must appreciate the delicate balance Rome maintained, the military machine enforcing order, the culture shaping identity, and the everyday choices of individuals weaving the empire's enduring tapestry.
What happens when an empire that has dominated for centuries begins to falter, not from a single enemy, but from its own strengths and flaws? Rome's turning point was neither sudden nor dramatic in a cinematic sense, yet the consequences would reverberate for generations. Understanding this moment requires examining decisions, miscalculations, and the human element behind them. The first critical factor was overextension. Rome had expanded to unprecedented limits, from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania, controlling territories that stretched across 3 continents. Maintaining such a vast domain required an intricate network of roads, supply chains, garrisons, and governance. Each province had its own challenges, rebellious tribes, logistical hurdles, and the constant need for resources. The legion, once a concentrated instrument of dominance, now had to disperse across a sprawling empire. Discipline and cohesion were strained, and local commanders often acted with more autonomy than central authority could monitor. One illustrative example is the empire's northern frontier along the Rhine and Danube rivers. For decades, Rome had faced intermittent threats from Germanic tribes. Small-scale raids became more frequent as the empire's focus shifted to distant campaigns. Generals in these regions had to make rapid decisions with limited information, balancing the need to defend territory against maintaining favor with Rome's central government. Consider the human pressure. A general's miscalculation could result in annihilation of his forces, loss of prestige, and even execution. It was a high-stakes environment where every choice carried mortal consequences. Economic strain compounded military challenges. Funding an empire-wide network of roads, fortresses, and legions required immense resources. Taxation often provoked local resentment, while inflation and corruption eroded the state's efficiency. Provinces grew restless under the weight of heavy demands, leading to uprisings that demanded both military and political attention. Here, strategy became as much about diplomacy and administration as battlefield prowess. A commander might win a pitched battle, yet fail to quell unrest if political and social foundations were weak. Internal power struggles accelerated Rome's turning point. Ambitious generals and politicians jockeyed for supremacy, exploiting distant provinces as power bases. Civil wars, once rare, became increasingly frequent, draining resources and morale. The loyalty of soldiers, previously ensured by discipline and shared purpose, began to tilt toward individual commanders who promised personal gain or security. The empire's central authority, once absolute, became fragile, leaving strategic decisions vulnerable to personal ambition rather than coordinated policy. The consequences of a single misjudged campaign could cascade across the empire. A failed invasion in the east, a poorly supplied frontier, or a rebellion left unchecked created vulnerabilities that enemies exploited. The Roman command structure, designed for a smaller, centralized state, struggled to adapt. Decision-making became reactive, defensive, and often short-sighted. A general's tactical brilliance could no longer compensate for systemic weaknesses.
personal stories illustrate the human dimension of this decline. Consider a governor tasked with defending a remote province while awaiting orders from Rome. He faced hostile tribes, scarce supplies, and the constant pressure of political rivals. Decisions were made in isolation, with delayed communication magnifying the consequences of error. The stress on individual leaders was immense, and their choices, sometimes minor, sometimes catastrophic, could accelerate the empire's unraveling. Strategic miscalculations were also a factor. Rome had relied heavily on legionary discipline and superior organization, but enemies adapted. Tribes began to employ guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and strategic retreats that countered conventional formations. The legion's rigidity, once a strength, became a liability against unpredictable, mobile foes. The empire faced a sobering lesson. Adaptability, not brute force alone, dictated long-term survival. Political decisions exacerbated these military pressures. Emperors and senators often pursued campaigns to enhance prestige rather than address strategic necessity. Resources were diverted towards glory rather than sustainability, leaving critical regions underdefended. This misalignment between political ambition and military reality created vulnerabilities that enemies exploited. Consider the irony. The very qualities that had propelled Rome to dominance, ambition, discipline, and aggressive strategy, now threatened its stability.
Civil unrest further intensified the turning point. Provinces that had once welcomed Roman rule began to resist heavy taxation, conscription, and cultural assimilation. Revolts erupted, forcing legions to divert attention from external threats to internal pacification. The logistical and psychological burden on commanders was immense. Every rebellion risked spreading unrest to neighboring regions, creating a chain reaction of instability. Maintaining order required both military force and political acumen, yet neither was always available in adequate measure. Archaeological evidence confirms the empire's fragility during this period. Fortifications were hastily expanded or repaired. Inscriptions reveal sudden changes in command, and economic records indicate strained resources. Coins, monuments, and letters reflect attempts to maintain legitimacy amidst mounting crises. These artifacts illustrate the complexity of the turning point. Rome's power was neither diminished overnight nor absolute, but increasingly precarious.
By the end of this section, it is clear that Rome's turning point was a crucible of human decision-making, strategic tension, and systemic pressure. The empire's decline was neither inevitable nor sudden, but the combination of overreach, misaligned priorities, and unforeseen consequences created conditions that would reshape the known world. The story of this period is as much about human resilience and error as it is about armies and empires. As we transition to the next section, we will examine the long-term consequences of these turning points, how Rome's successes and failures influenced world history, shaped civilizations, and left lessons for leaders across time. The empire's legacy, forged in both triumph and vulnerability, provides insights into the enduring interplay between strategy, power, and human nature. What happens when an empire that once dominated the known world begins to falter, leaving a legacy that stretches far beyond its fall? Rome's conquests and governance left indelible marks on civilization, some intended, others unforeseen. The consequences of its military and political actions rippled through history, influencing societies, governance, warfare, and culture centuries later. The most immediate impact was geopolitical. Rome's expansion reshaped borders, created new political entities, and established systems of control that outlasted individual emperors. Territories once independent
became integrated into a network of provinces governed by Roman law, administered by appointed magistrates and defended by stationed legions. Even after central authority weakened, the administrative frameworks persisted, laying foundations for successor states across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Borders drawn for military efficiency became political realities that shaped future kingdoms and nations. Military innovations developed by Rome had long-lasting effects. Legionary organization, disciplined formations, and advanced siege tactics were studied and adopted by later civilizations. The testudo formation, manipular legions, and standardized training became references for medieval armies and modern military theorists. Rome demonstrated that disciplined, cohesive forces could conquer far larger populations when combined with strategic intelligence and logistical foresight. Even centuries later, the principles of Roman military strategy, coordination, supply management, and adaptability were cited by generals from Napoleon to modern military academies. Culturally, Rome's influence was equally profound. Latin became the lingua franca of law, administration, and scholarship, forming the root of the Romance languages spoken today. Roman law, codified and systematized, influenced legal frameworks in Europe, shaping concepts of citizenship, contracts, and property rights that remain foundational in modern jurisprudence. Cities once Roman colonies evolved into centers of governance, commerce, and learning, preserving urban planning principles and architectural aesthetics that endure in modern Europe. The empire also reshaped religion and philosophy. Roman religious syncretism integrated local deities and practices, creating a cultural flexibility that allowed conquered peoples to coexist under imperial rule. Later, the empire facilitated the spread of Christianity, transforming it from a persecuted sect into a dominant faith. Philosophical thought, from Stoicism to civic ethics, influenced both leadership ideals and public life, embedding values of duty, civic responsibility, and governance that echoed through Renaissance and Enlightenment thought. Social consequences were equally enduring. Rome's rigid yet functional social hierarchy, from patricians to plebeians and slaves, became a model for understanding social order and mobility. Slavery, while morally reprehensible, provided labor that fueled infrastructure projects, agriculture, and urban life, leaving behind archaeological evidence of complex economies. Veterans settling in colonies helped disseminate Roman culture, creating hybrid societies where local customs merged with imperial norms. These interactions illustrate how conquest can permanently alter social structures, producing both cohesion and tension.
Economically, Rome's strategies created interconnected markets spanning the Mediterranean and beyond. Roads, aqueducts, and ports facilitated trade, movement of armies, and resource allocation. Local economies became integrated into a larger imperial framework, creating wealth, but also dependency on imperial stability. Disruption, whether from internal conflict or external pressure, had cascading effects, highlighting the fragility of overextended economic networks. Modern infrastructure planning continues to reflect lessons from Rome's emphasis on connectivity, supply lines, and resource distribution. Archaeological discoveries reinforce the scale and sophistication of Rome's influence. Excavations of forts, roads, villas, and public buildings reveal not only military and engineering prowess, but also cultural integration. Coins, inscriptions, and household artifacts illustrate daily life, governance, and social hierarchy, providing evidence of how deeply Roman systems penetrated conquered territories. These findings demonstrate that Rome's impact was not fleeting. The physical and cultural traces endured long after the empire's political authority waned. Viewer engagement is key here. Consider how a decision made by a Roman general or senator centuries ago continues to shape law, language, and city planning today. The consequences of these choices extend far beyond the battlefield, highlighting the enduring connection between power, governance, and societal evolution. Every tactical maneuver, political alliance, or conquered province contributed to a legacy that continues to inform modern institutions and thought. One significant consequence was the diffusion of Roman military culture and strategy. Mercenary forces, local militias, and later European armies adapted Roman tactics, logistics, and command structures. This influence can be traced through the Byzantine Empire, medieval European armies, and even into modern military doctrine. Rome's integration of conquered peoples into its legions ensured that knowledge of its military principles survived even when central authority faltered. In this sense, the Roman military legacy became an enduring template for organized warfare.
Politically, Rome's experience offers lessons in empire management and the risks of overextension. Centralized control over diverse territories required careful balance between coercion and collaboration. Failures in leadership, misaligned ambitions, and internal rivalries accelerated decline, demonstrating that even the most powerful empires are vulnerable to internal weaknesses. For modern leaders, Rome provides cautionary examples of ambition outpacing infrastructure, strategy, or resource management. Understanding these lessons is essential for evaluating both historical and contemporary geopolitical challenges. The human dimension of Rome's consequences is equally important. Conquered populations faced cultural assimilation, economic restructuring, and social stratification. Soldiers experienced identity shifts, loyalty dynamics, and lifelong exposure to imperial ideology. Civilians, slaves, and elites each navigated a complex system of rewards and punishments. By examining personal narratives and archaeological evidence, we see how human experiences intersected with broader historical forces. Rome's story is as much about individuals navigating empire as it is about institutions and armies. Economic and social integration also left a lasting imprint on European civilization. Roman roads became trade arteries for centuries. Urban centers persisted as hubs of commerce and culture, and legal structures provided templates for governance. Even post-collapse, the institutional and infrastructural legacy allowed subsequent kingdoms and states to rise more quickly, leveraging Roman innovations in law, architecture, and administration. In this way, Rome's influence extended beyond its political lifespan, shaping the trajectory of Western civilization. Viewer engagement can be reinforced with a question. If you were a citizen or soldier during the empire's height, aware that your actions might influence centuries to come, how would you navigate loyalty, ambition, and duty? This perspective bridges the gap between historical events and modern reflection, emphasizing the personal stakes embedded in broader historical forces. The strategic lesson is clear. Military and political brilliance can achieve dominance, but lasting influence requires integration, governance, and adaptability. Rome's successes in conquest were mirrored by their failures in succession, overextension, and internal cohesion. By studying these dynamics, we gain insight into the complex interplay of military power, political authority, cultural assimilation, and societal evolution. These lessons resonate not only for historians, but for contemporary leaders and strategists evaluating the rise and fall of states. By the conclusion of this section, it becomes evident that Rome's impact was multidimensional. Military innovation, political structures, cultural diffusion, and social transformation intertwined to create a legacy unparalleled in history. The empire's influence persists in law, language, infrastructure, military strategy, and governance. Understanding these consequences allows us to appreciate how the choices of individuals and institutions shaped not only an empire, but the world itself. As we move to the final section, we will explore Rome's modern relevance, drawing parallels between ancient strategy, political dynamics, and lessons that resonate in today's world. How does an empire that fell over 1,500 years ago still inform leadership, military thinking, and societal organization today? The answer reveals the timeless significance of Rome's legacy. As we reach the conclusion of our journey through Rome's might, its battles, and the human stories behind its empire, one question remains: what does this ancient civilization mean for us today? The Roman Empire, with all its discipline, strategy, and ambition, offers timeless lessons in leadership, governance, and the complex interplay of military and societal power. Its rise and eventual challenges provide a lens through which we can examine modern institutions, strategies, and human decision-making. Rome's most enduring legacy lies in the integration of power and culture. The empire demonstrated that dominance alone is not enough. Long-term influence requires infrastructure, administration, and the capacity to integrate diverse peoples. Roads, aqueducts, legal codes, and urban planning were not just tools of convenience, they were instruments of control, cohesion, and cultural transformation. Modern states, corporations, and institutions echo this principle. Achieving goals is one thing, sustaining them demands systems, culture, and adaptability. Rome teaches that influence is as much about organization and integration as it is about brute force. From a military perspective, Rome's strategic principles continue to resonate. Discipline, logistics, adaptability, and cohesion remain foundational to effective military operations. The lessons of overextension and the dangers of relying solely on technological or numerical superiority remain relevant. Commanders today study Roman campaigns to understand strategy, foresight, and the human factors that shape success or failure. Even small tactical decisions, how to position troops, anticipate enemy maneuvers, or maintain morale, can be decisive, just as they were along the Danube, the Rhine, or in the deserts of Africa centuries ago.
Modern, multicultural societies carries risks of unrest and inefficiency, emphasizing that societal harmony is a strategic asset. The human dimension is equally instructive. Soldiers, governors, civilians, and elites all played roles in shaping outcomes. Individual decisions, courage, and errors multiplied into historical consequences. Rome reminds us that history is not an abstract force. It is the cumulative effect of human choices under pressure. Leadership is tested not only in victories, but in managing crises, balancing competing priorities, and making decisions with incomplete information. A lesson that resonates for executives, generals, and leaders of all kinds. Modern parallels extend to infrastructure, law, and urban development. Roman roads facilitated trade, communication, and rapid military deployment. Aqueducts brought water and sustained growing populations. City planning created functional, resilient communities. Today, successful planning and long-term investment continue to rely on the same principles of connectivity, efficiency, and foresight. Rome teaches that vision, combined with disciplined execution, leaves a legacy that can endure for centuries. Finally, Rome challenges us to reflect on the nature of power itself. Military might, political ambition, and cultural dominance can achieve extraordinary outcomes, but sustainability depends on adaptability, ethics, and human cohesion. Empires rise and fall, but the lessons embedded in their successes and failures persist. What would you have done as a commander, a governor, or a citizen of Rome? How would you navigate loyalty, strategy, and the pressures of survival? These questions bridge the past and present, reminding us that the dynamics of power, human behavior, and societal organization are universal. In conclusion, the Roman Empire remains more than a historical curiosity. It is a case study in leadership, strategy, and civilization building. Its triumphs and crises offer lessons for military strategists, political leaders, urban planners, and everyday citizens. From discipline in the legions to the intricacies of governance, Rome's story demonstrates that the interplay of human decision-making, organizational structure, and cultural influence shapes history in ways that echo across centuries. By studying its legacy, we gain insight not only into the past, but into the principles that continue to govern societies and institutions today. Rome's enduring relevance is clear. Strategy without adaptability, power without integration, and ambition without foresight all carry consequences. Yet when executed wisely, the same elements that built an empire can inspire growth, cohesion, and resilience. History, as always, is a mirror. Through the lens of Rome, we see timeless truths about leadership, human nature, and the delicate balance between strength and sustainability. The empire may have fallen, but its lessons remain alive, challenging us to understand the past and to consider how we might apply its insights in the complex world of today.